Welcome to EDGEcast, the series where we show you tips, tricks, and best practices when using Solid Edge. In this episode, we'll be showing all of you CAD administrators out there how to make Solid Edge behave in the same way for all your users across a network. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term CAD administrator, I mean someone who's ideally an experienced CAD user who manages or advises the less experienced users, who has some experience of IT system administration or network management, and who is involved with managing CAD projects and sign-off processes for their company. Most of this video won't be aimed at solo users, but if you are a solo user and you want to know where certain config files such as whole tables are kept, I'll be showing their locations. To start off, I'll discuss how to download maintenance packs or software updates. After that, I'll show you how to become a Solid Edge admin with the appropriate admin utility. Finally, I'll show you how to set up custom template folders, how to clone settings and preferences so that workstations can be set up for all users in the same way, and some general best practices for Solid Edge workstations, which will allow admins to troubleshoot the most common issues that can affect Solid Edge. Maintenance packs are the executable files used to update Solid Edge after it's been installed, to fix any problems not picked up during beta testing. For example, there was a conflict between Windows and ST9's data management suite after release, where on certain systems Windows would actively deregister critical property handlers. This was fixed after release with a maintenance pack. They can be downloaded from the Siemens GTAC website under Download and Upload Files. To access it, you'll need to have a registered WebKey account. If you're not sure how to set one up, please refer to our Solid Edge licensing EDGEcast episode. Once there, open Product Updates, the currently installed version of Solid Edge, Maintenance Packs, and then the pack you want to install. Unless you're using an integration such as Teamcenter or a plugin that requires a specific pack, I recommend the latest one. Once downloaded, just double-click it to run on a workstation with Solid Edge installed. Now I'll show you how to become a Solid Edge admin. It's actually fairly simple to do for an existing user. All you need is for a particular utility to be present in your program folder. The utility is called seadmin.exe, and it can be found under the following folder on the DVD or your downloaded media: Solid Edge, SPT Tools, seadmin. Copy this file that you find into C, Program Files, Solid Edge ST10, Program, or wherever your install directory is kept. I also advise creating a shortcut on the Start menu if you are likely to use it more than once. When it's run, it will attempt to open the options.xml file listed in the existing file locations. If you don't have one set up already, you'll see a warning which you can then safely dismiss and create a new options file. Then you'll see this interface. When you save your changes, they write to your options file, and if your users then use their Solid Edge options menu to point to this file, their workstations will behave just like yours. If you want some users to have different options depending on their role, just use seadmin to create a new options file for that role. And there we are. I'm now a Solid Edge administrator, ready to set up my users' options. However, there's quite a few, and this is only meant to be a short video. So what are the most important things that need changing? You may have noticed that there are two main types of value in this Solid Edge administrator: true or false fields and file locations. Some also allow text entries. Arguably the most important setting is the location of the user templates. There are some that come out of the box, which I recommend using as a base for creating your own. As you can imagine, if all your users are using the same templates, all the resulting files will have the same backgrounds, call out the same information, and be generally easier to edit for the whole company. Double-click on the value entry and select a shared folder that contains templates. This can be either on a workstation or a server, but it must be shared before it can be selected. Options.xml will contain all of these settings, and in fact, this is what we're editing when we open up seadmin. In a network environment, you can share the location of one options file, from which the admin can edit their options file, and drive everyone's settings from there. It's also possible to set Allow Override to No, meaning that the users are unable to edit the options file location setting and regain access to their options. Once they point to this new options file, only the admin can change their settings. Some, but not all, companies use standard parts databases to place fasteners, fixings, piping components, and others, and any new users will need to point to this database before they can access the parts contained in it. The only thing the users need to access, though, is the .sac file, or Standard Parts Configuration file. Its full name is smap.inifile.sac, in case you're searching for it by file name. Whoever installed standard parts, if it's present, should have generated the SAC file at the root directory of the database, and it should be a simple process to point to it with seadmin. After setting this file location, any database updates will be reflected in the user's part placement window. Templates are not the only place where new CAD file properties can be defined. As you may know, many template files can be used by SolidEdge, so a single file called propsy.txt can define any custom file properties that SolidEdge doesn't automatically add to new files. For example, a list of suppliers, or a blank field for any notes for a particular department. Once set up, pointing seadmin to read this file will standardize the properties available for all users you're governing to add to their new SolidEdge files. Remember that whenever you make changes in seadmin, remember to hit save. So here's an example. I'll assume my current prop seed has been shared. Let's open it with Notepad++. As you can see, we have 4 standard properties, which I'm not going to touch, and some I added myself, including this one, vendor. I've already pointed to this file with seadmin, and so I'll create a new file, and then open the file properties associated with it. Now, some of these are fixed, but any custom properties can be filled in with this section. Let's add a vendor. The same list will be available to everyone who uses the same propseed file as dictated by seadmin. When using certain commands, users will often have a menu where SolidEdge can store saved settings for quick access later on. For example, holes, slots, and vents have saved settings fields in their options dialog boxes. These are all saved to one file in the preferences folder called custom.xml, and they can be unique for users. Now, if you're using seadmin and a shared custom.xml file, every user across your network can have the same shortcut lists when using these commands. Useful if there are a few holes that everyone needs to use most of the time. Speaking of holes, it's possible to direct all users to access a unified database of hole standards. As of a few versions ago, SolidEdge started using Excel spreadsheets to store hole libraries, as they're much easier to edit than the previous text files. The holes database section on threaded holes also populates the menu when assigning a thread to a cylindrical face. Here's an example of a holes database, specifically the isometric one that comes with SolidEdge. It's possible to create your own, but I recommend using an existing database as a starting point, rather than creating a blank spreadsheet. You can also add hole entries if the existing ones aren't enough, and even edit the values for standard holes, although I don't recommend this for obvious reasons. If you want to create new holes in your database, it's best practice to copy rows and edit values, to make sure none are missed out. If you want to open your hole tables to see what's available, this can be done through SolidEdge. Start a hole command, go into Options, then select this menu button. Excel will start up and open the hole table for the selected standard. There's one spreadsheet per standard in case you were wondering, but inside each, there are sheets for each of the hole types at the bottom, as well as instructions on how to add your own hole entries on the left. If you're curious about how to edit all of these configuration files, we'll be discussing this in future EDGEcast episodes. A Solid Edge administrator can also deny access to certain functions to reduce the power of non-admin users. One example of this is the simple on-off switch that can disable Design Manager. With override turned off and the value set to true, users will be unable to revise, release, or make items obsolete. These are powerful functions, and it may be beneficial to restrict access to them, particularly if using the built-in data management utility. Let's show what happens when I disable Design Manager on my workstation, remembering to save changes to Options. If I did this while Solid Edge was open, by the way, my changes wouldn't register until I restart the software. Here's a nice clean demo dataset, and let's say I'm a brand new user who wants to release this entire assembly and everything in it without my manager's permission. I can only do that through Design Manager, so let's start it. The button's still there because I haven't made any ribbon bar changes, but if I click it, I'm going to get this warning asking me to contact my system administrator. Perfect. The link management file, which is normally found in the user's preferences folder, is particularly useful if your users have a habit of cutting and pasting Solid Edge files. In an unmanaged environment, files often move themselves to different locations. However, this can cause major problems with assemblies, drafts, and part copies, as they rely on file paths for their links to their components. And no doubt you're familiar with assemblies that open with all their parts missing. In the case of a broken file link, Solid Edge can be set to look automatically in certain folders for same-name items to repair the file links. This is all set up in a file called linkmanagement.txt. Solid Edge recursively searches through all subfolders of the search path locations noted here, so one method of making sure your Solid Edge assemblies automatically repair themselves when opened is to write all of your CAD Vault locations to this link management file. If all users are pointed to the same file, they'll have a safety net and hopefully never have to search for moved files again, unless of course they've been moved out of your normal CAD Vault. We recommend moving files around with Design Manager if possible. Combining that concept of Design Manager and file links, it's worth knowing that Solid Edge does not allow the release of assembly or draft files that link to unreleased files, at least not normally. It's a fairly sensible setting from a data management perspective, but some users prefer to override this behaviour. Depending on how restrictive you want to be as an admin, this can be set up with Allow Unreleased Links. I'd personally recommend it being disabled, as having a released draft of an assembly that's still editable isn't best practice. Another useful setting is the automatic revision of draft files when their 3D files are revised. If this option is active, a new revision of any linked draft file will be created, with the same content and annotations, but linking to the revision of the 3D file, not the original 3D file. Assuming that there is at least one active draft per 3D file, this can halve the workload when revising components, although some companies prefer to have this disabled, particularly if they have many drafts linked to one assembly. Depending on your company's policy regarding CAD revisions, you may want to lock down this option. However, bear in mind that you must have data management active for it to work, and all the files being revised must be indexed. If using Teamcenter, this may already be set as part of your configuration. A backup folder can be defined if your users are planning to run Solid Edge for long periods of time. All software can crash or become unresponsive, and as a result, constant backups are a useful alternative to having to sit Save All many times. Automatic backups, however, aren't activated by SCAdmin. You can only change the backup location. Backups can be enabled or disabled in the Solid Edge Options menu under the Save section, as some users may wish to disable this if it lowers workstation performance. It's particularly important that material libraries are common for all users in a company. If all users are referring to the same defined lists of materials, then you shouldn't have a problem with draft callouts for materials. In Solid Edge, materials are stored in the .mtl file format, which is most easily edited through Solid Edge itself. It's possible to have multiple material libraries, including ones entirely created by users, Different material families can be created, with brand new material properties and visual styles when viewed in 3D or in the draft environment. Once again, it's useful to have these stored in a shared location, defined by SEAdmin, and for their editing to be carried out by a single administrator. When you open a file in Solid Edge, by default the file name displays at the top of the screen, and at the top of the feature tree. However, it's also possible to include more information such as document number, revision number, project name, author. When in Solid Edge Admin, if you double-click on the value next to Replace File Name, you'll see a list of the valid entries. You're able to create a compound formula for the display of the document name, which includes properties, separators such as dashes and spaces, and even plain text entries if required. The properties available for display are shown here. This can provide more useful information to users. If the document number is easily accessible and unique, it might be useful to know, in addition to the file name, or maybe the title of the file, or maybe all three at once. As the administrator, the choice is yours. In this example, I want to display a different formula for all my open parts. Instead of just file name, I want a combination of document number, author, and file title, followed by a piece of plain text. Let's add this here. Save the formula, and open my mover assembly to view the result. There we go. Now users can quickly view all three properties in Pathfinder. I haven't changed the files, I've only changed how they're displayed. You might have noticed that many of the more complex settings are stored in other external files, not the options file itself. I advise creating a single folder to contain all shared Solid Edge templates and config files, and using SEAdmin to point to locations in this folder. Then I advise denying write access to this folder for everyone except the admins. This will prevent unwanted settings edits by your users from taking place. You might be asking, but couldn't this work if I copied all these files locally? And the answer is yes. The options files and everything else can be copied to an offline workstation, and they'll behave just fine. However, if you copy the options file to a user's workstation, it means they can just open the file up with Notepad and edit the values directly. It's not a particularly difficult file to edit if you're aware that Notepad will open it, just like a text file, but SEAdmin is a much more user-friendly way of editing it. If you want to keep control over your users' options, don't send this file to users, just make sure that they're pointed to it from Solid Edge's Options menu. The last set of options I want to show you is the file template list. There are other options that I could show, but we're running short on time. When starting Solid Edge's New File dialog, you automatically see a list of file templates, by default isometric. By reading the folder structure in C Program Files Solid Edge Template, you can see that all the templates visible are organized into subfolders. Anything one level down from this defined location will be considered a template and accessible by Solid Edge. Any of these can be accessed with the New button or Control-N, but how do you change from isometric? In other words, how do you set the default standard? You do this by choosing Edit List, either from the New menu or from the Start menu, and choosing a particular folder for your default company templates. Also, if you want to include templates from many folders in your Start menu, you can create a user-defined list with New List, allowing you to include templates from many folders if necessary. In this list, I want to include only two things: my isometric part template and a quicksheet assembly draft template. I also want to change my display name for each of them, so I won't base my list on one that currently exists. Instead, I'll use a new list, which I'll call Custom. It is currently empty, so I'll browse for my ISO part template. And let's give it a display name, part. And I'll do exactly the same with my quicksheet template. Once I've accepted this, my new file menu will show only these two. with my custom display names assigned. Now that's a setting that doesn't save to options.xml. There are others such as button layout, radial menu setup, etc., which are stored in user profiles and can't be directly driven from the options files. However, as of ST9, there's a utility called Settings and Preferences Wizard that allows all of these to be exported as a single file with the extension .sepref. What this does is capture as many files as the user likes, including registry entries and anything in the Preferences folder, as you see here. It then allows users to either deploy them locally or point to a shared .sepref file with Solid Edge options. So, to make everyone's copy of Solid Edge follow the same button layout, create a theme on your admin machine, export a .sepref file, and then use seadmin to point all of your users to this location with Settings and Preferences file. I'll be explaining how to edit button layouts in a future EDGEcast episode. Finally, I'll leave you with some general housekeeping tips that no Solid Edge administrator should be without. One common problem for users is if their graphics drivers are out of date, then display problems can occur, including the very common checkerboarding effect. Assemblies being slow to update, sketches displaying false copies of themselves when sketch views are panned, the list goes on. I strongly advise making sure that your graphics hardware and software is on the list provided on the Siemens Graphics Certifications list. You will find a link in the description of this video to the page where you can download the list for reference. Next, if your users don't regularly clear their temporary files, I advise that they do so. Free utilities such as CCleaner are quite useful, as Solid Edge writes large amounts of data to temporary files, and sometimes several gigabytes of drive space can be filled up with this. Also, when storing CAD files on hard drives, it's best to make sure you've scheduled regular defrags. Also, if you're using 3D mice such as Space Explorers, I advise making sure you install the drivers recommended for your OS. These might not be the latest issued drivers though. We've run into problems with sketch orientation in the past because users downloaded the latest drivers for their 3D mice without making sure they were recommended for their operating system, so it's worth bearing in mind when managing Solid Edge workstations. So, to summarise, we've covered how to obtain maintenance packs for Solid Edge, and how to use the Solid Edge admin utility to drive software preferences and options for all users. Then we explained how to use Settings and Preferences Wizard to deploy custom button layouts, and finally, we gave some general IT best practices when looking after Solid Edge workstations. With all the above information, you should be able to roll out any changes to users over a system just by editing one or two shared files. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, topics you'd like us to cover, or other feedback, please either leave a comment below or send them to us by email at support@cuttingedge.co.uk. I'll be sure to tune in to watch the next episode of EDGEcast, when we'll be discussing how to customize your user interface.